Morning, everyone, and welcome back, or welcome if you're new today, to the day 2 of this symposium. I think we'll get things started straight away. So I'm going to introduce Caroline Swash, who I think if anybody has had an ounce of interest in stained glass over the last few years will have certainly come across Caroline's work, both as a practitioner and as a writer and an educator.
Thank you very much. It's a very exciting opportunity, actually, because I had always wondered what ACE did. I mean, there's this dynamic title, Art and Christian Inquiry. You know, there's art, that's fabulous, there's Christian, that's problematic and riveting, and there's inquiry, which is total. And it's wonderful to see how lively and friendly and fun it is. So, away we go. Now, like the other speakers, really, I'm taking the roots way to looking at where we've got to now. And I think that we cannot underestimate the force, power and horror of the 3 countries that we're considering, France, Germany and Britain, experienced during the war. And there's this rather touching photograph of the King and Queen looking at the ruins, as well as what shock blast did to the glass at Westminster Abbey, and then, of course, the saturation bombing of Berlin. So, moving rapidly on from there, the attitude in Britain, at least certainly in London, and I suspect that it tended to pertain throughout Britain, was the sense that we had somehow come through it because of who we were, and hopefully will continue to be. So there was this feeling that the past needed to be, so to speak, honoured. And here you have St. Vedas Church, Seeley and Paget doing the building in a kind of Wren feel, because that was very much what they were about and what they loved. And Brian Thomas, who was an immensely skilled, very thoughtful sort of Rome scholar artist, and then a very, very good teacher at Byam Shaw, he did their glass as and when they needed it. And he would have it very, very carefully drawn and painted, and then it would be worked on at Whitefriars by him, by hand. And he has, in this sort of accumulative east window at St. Andrew's, Holborn, he's kind of redone the panels that were there before in the old glass, but in a very imaginative way. And I hope you'll go and look at that window, because there are some wonderful sort of quirky details, really. I mean, the theatrical element there to this new space. And also you'll find that there's an urn with a cloth over it. So almost all his work has these wonderful touches of regret and hope. Now, I think that Whitefriars are very clever in grabbing Pierre Formentreau. I wish I knew more about Pierre Formentreau. I'm pretty sure he had an English wife, whether he acquired her in France or whether she kind of, you know, was found by him later on. But it was definitely quite a swipe to get this knowledgeable artist from France. And he did some very, very good, powerful work. I think the bit that was missed yesterday about the point of concrete glass was that a really good, secure, wall, really, of glass and concrete. And, you know, you couldn't kick it in, and if you threw a stone at it, it bounced off. There were none of the problems that people were having yesterday with it. And churches were very pioneering. They wanted to go into council estates and sort of things that were being built after the war, bring the church to them, make the church a centre, bring it alive again. And this sort of building material really was something that was very, very useful. I was thrilled to see that this church, the United Reformed, now called Lumen, has this really very, very attractive update in which Formentreau's windows be removed, and this now really acts as a west window very, very successfully. But, and it's a big but, Coventry really was a watershed. It drove a sort of coach and horses really through the idea that we should honour what had been there before. It absolutely went sort of right on into some completely different and far, far more dynamic interpretation of what stained glass and what a church should be. And the provost and the artists really all combined in this effort. So really, there's a young Patrick, can you make him out, standing beside his really very ahead of the game own window. I mean, Patrick tends to get rather obscure sometimes, I feel. And his own sort of movement in the arts is just as really is immensely important. These, I do rather feel that when Piper was allowed out of the church, he did the most beautiful things. And this is one of my favourites. There are various ideas of how you interpret this lovely window, which you still can see. The Sanderson is now a hotel, but you can go and have a rather delicious drink. And then they pull the curtain aside for you, and you can see the staircase, which has got this wonderful work upon it. Now, we cannot avoid what happened in France without giving Couturier really all the credit that he deserves. He was very lucky he was out of it all. He didn't have the problem of being wondered about, what was he doing during that time. There he was in Canada, so he could come back. He'd been a glass artist, and he had, as was dealt with yesterday and will be, I'm sure, again today, this capacity to get on well with the artists and also get on well with the established church, of course with the support of the bishop and so forth. And here he is with Chagall, and I'm not sure who the third one is. Oh, thank you. Brilliant. We see thank you so much. And this has been seen before, but when I was working on the big book for a very dodgy publisher, I had the opportunity. The best thing about it was going to Christie's Images. You can all go to Christie's Images, I imagine, if you sort of pay or something. But there in their archive are a whole range of Impressionists and what you might call post-Impressionist paintings, which haven't sort of come up for sale. There are no millionaires really interested in it. And there's some fabulous work out there, which I was able to get them to put in the book, where you can see the basis for the stained glass work that came along. Otherwise, you tend to, I think, rather see the work in a kind of vortex. And I just wanted to read you, this is Batzen writing, a word from the master. Painting today can perhaps give this same faith some vitality in the form of revelation of the exterior world through more intense interior vision. He writes, a moment of truth in which the rhythms of life naturally assume a form of meditation. Well, this isn't really the kind of sentence you could just read and get it. It's obviously something that one is expected to contemplate. But I think this philosophical, this striving for an inner and another and a deeper thing is terribly important to remember. And how amazing it must be. I mean, this was seen yesterday as well, that to have been baptized, for people to witness a baptism in that font, in that space, completely surrounded by this gold and yellow glass. An amazing experience. Now, Matisse, so loved, so revered, and really the only thing extra that I can think of to add to the very, very interesting remarks made yesterday was this, to just expand a bit upon the yellow glass, because I found some texts. He went on and on and on, did Matisse, about wanting an intense buttercup rather than an orange, he says, or a yellow shade. And he wanted the yellow to be both translucent, not transparent. He wanted the colour sufficiently saturated to stand on its own next to blue and green, and yet have its own energy. And he complained that the samples sent to him by long-suffering Paul Bonney, actually not probably Paul Bonney, Paul Bonney's glassblower, he writes, not enough lemon in this sample, probably samples, not enough of the oboe in it. Sort of, it's wonderful kind of vision of how the emotion and the colour are being, considered, which of course is what gets us. And when we look at it, this tremendous mix of thinking and feeling and considering and, we must not forget this. Anyway, that's the great Matisse. Now, the whole reason why I started wittering on about French glass was because I have a certain amount to do with this amazing organization started by Helga Ray Young, which started off as sort of 16 women from 25 countries about 15 years ago. It's one of those groups. And Hiscot's a member, and they're various British, but they're German and American and Austrian. It's a brilliant idea, and it's all glass girls, so to speak, glass women, well, women working in glass. And they have this incredible arrangement where one of their number arranges experiences in her own country. This year it was France. Then, in 2 years' time, they meet again and they have an exhibition in another country and with another, organized by another member of the group, say Japan, you know. So they meet every 2 years with the exhibition material that they have created in response to what they've seen the year before. So they have a year to do it in. And it's brilliant, and they've come up with some wonderful things. This is one of their days. And I got sort of hysterically excited email from Ginger Farrell, who's my American, one of the American representatives, said, it's absolutely incredible, you've got to go to France. I haven't been to France, so it's all false pretenses what I'm telling you. I haven't actually seen it, so hopefully later on today others will. But here, this is kind of what's going on, and it is clearly absolutely phenomenal and very, very different. And I have just a few things to show you. I mean, this is something else. This is a clothing of all the background to this amazing, by the looks of it, amazing space. And what's happening to it? I mean, you have to be there to feel it. You have to, I think, get it, but it is clearly changing, intended to change the update. You know, one's really not quite sure what the intellectual background to this is, but it is definitely being greeted in France by tremendous enthusiasm, at least among what, I'm trying to think what one could call it, the département, the intellectual, the artists, how much the local parish priests, you know, how all that system works in France. Maybe we'll hear later today, but, you know, it looks absolutely amazing, and technically it is just astonishing. I mean, the stuff being done to glass, it's just amazing. What slightly perturbed me, Françoise Perrault, who is directrice of the international thing in Chartres, and then she did Sorbonne and all this. She's a renowned French glass historian, and did the Dior-et-Loire sort of window catalogues. She took me to this workshop, rather slightly hesitant about the title on the catalogue, Marcheurs et Regadeurs. I mean, does that mean that the churches where the parish kind of more or less doesn't exist anymore are places which are to be beautified, as it were, for people to pass through and enjoy? But, you know, I don't know. And more of that, hopefully, today. For now, for my talk, as a starter, I want to wrench you back to England, to the other participants in Coventry, many of whom we heard yesterday, and Lawrence Lee, who really was the one who fixed it. I mean, I asked him how he got it, and he said, well, he'd heard that the commission was probably going to France. So he arranged for the architect to come and be, so to speak, judge of the student competition, and then he organized this very interesting glass exhibition from Geoffrey Clark and Keith New. And he just said, let's go for it. Well, yeah, you can do the nave windows. It's absolutely brilliant. So he got that commission, and that commission really allowed the Royal College to up its game in the glass department. They got more space. They got their ex-students in. They got their younger students up, and they really got the whole show on the road and status, both for stained glass itself, but also for the Royal College and for the teaching that was going on. So let's take a look now at who those people were. This is Alan Younger, who sadly no longer with us, who did some very, very beautiful worked with Lawrence Lee for quite a long time. And Lawrence really was the key. I mean, he taught for a fairly long time at the Royal College, retired, ran his own studio, and in a sense, his way of continuing the education was that he had students working with him. So students would come with him and work on the work with him and even do bits of it. And they would go in. And I mean, that is experience without which, I mean, you gain so much from that. And he with his generosity of spirit, really made that possible. And Alan's done some very fine things, you see, including the windows, part of the windows in Westminster Abbey and the complete window in St Albans. Now, Jane Grey, totally different. I mean, there wasn't this set style thing at all. Jane's direction really was in this very exquisite plant observation and very, very elegant acid etching and painting. And she has continued to do some very beautiful things in her own way. And I think this is what is so important about, in a way, the kind of arts and crafts attitude, as Lee certainly interpreted it, that it is a personal art and craft that you're dealing with. And now, I think on the whole, his most useful, I still think his most useful student was Tim Lewis. Because Tim went back very much with Lawrence's approval, back to Swansea. Lawrence himself left the Royal College. Lawrence had hoped that Keith would take over. Keith didn't. They put Geoffrey Clark in instead. Geoffrey's much more interested in sculpture, in materials, in plastics and things. The space where the Coventry windows had been built there was nothing allowed there of glass. They were moved out, sort of clamped down, not exactly, but hot glass became the fashionable thing. And really, in terms of people training at the Royal College, there is a pretty big gap. As far as I know, there's people in hot glass, but not in anybody doing architectural work. Anyway, Tim goes back to Wales, and he decides with a sort of rather splendid anti-British attitude that what they're going to do is bring in German glass. And he chooses exactly, I'm sure he didn't know, exactly the right moment. And the great German artists, one of whom up there is Johannes Schreiter, but let's just go on. There's Schreiter and Schaffrath and Paschulte. There were about 5 or 6 of them. What had really happened was that the Protestant church had opposed Hitler. Once everything was sort of eventually sorted out, anyone that was, as it were, a churchman got to be, as it were, taxed along those lines. So the churches were supported, the churches had money. So the churches could afford, in the rebuilding, to have stained glass. And the architects, no way were they going to have somebody who was going to muck up their beautiful new church. So they chose people from the world of fine arts. And it was a total revelation. So there were no studios, effectively, in Germany. If they were, they were studios that would actually make the work of these artists. And here's Schreiter, an enchanting person. I mean, very, very sympathetic, very good speaker, very intellectual. The whole thing became intellectualized. I mean, obviously, you gather, it made a huge impact on me, personally, in my work. And here you have these broken lines, which are symbolic of the fracturedness, and the blue colour is bringing it all together. And this is for a nunnery, for the nuns, the new convent, and this is their chapel, and it is a blue enclosure, and the blue, of course, is traditionally the Mother of God, but it's also got this soothing, this very, very cool sort of psychological beauty. And there he tackles, I think, very cleverly, the kind of grieving and also the sort of minimalism that felt the penitential minimalism that seemed appropriate at that time. I remember having a visit to look at the various, Helga Ray Young took us round with the people from the North Wales College. And I remember going into one, windows were entirely grey. And I said to one of the students, it's a bit much, isn't it? She said, well, what else would you expect at that time? I mean, there had to be a penitential time, really. But I think a lot of them, perhaps since then, have rather moved. But this is so clever. Sorry, it's back to front. And it's the meshing and the netting and the mix of these simple things. Christianity is actually very much about taking simple things and applying them. So, Johannes, that appealed to him. Now, I got involved at a more personal level, really. It's a sort of mixed story, but the sort of best bit of it is that Schreiter failed to get the commission to make a whole series of windows in South Germany, and it was a situation in which it had been the Pope's library and it was now a church, right? Now, he stayed with us. I mean, nobody had any money, so he slept with us in Dulwich. My husband's a neurologist, and he was interested in this. I mean, art rather sort of leaves him rather cool, something I do. And he told about the library that was being made from the Church of St. Augustine and St. Philip, which was part of the hospital complex. It's too big, really. Everyone around was Muslim. And it was decided, with the delight, actually, the chaplain was much more interested in wandering priests to see people who wanted to see them, this should become the new library, let up grow in the library. So Michael said, well, why don't we ask Johannes to do some windows for the new library that's the church at present, because he didn't get that commission for a library that was a church, but he might be interested in something that was a church and is going to be a library. And Johannes went, yes. So we took him to the Whitechapel. He was a bit sort of, startled at the East End. And it's a beautiful big church by a very young architect. And he said, yes, let's do it. So we had a wonderful time. I thought it naively the way you do, only happen maybe get it done in a few years. It took 12 solid years to raise the funding for him to do it, but he stuck with it. He stuck with it. This is the AIDS window. It shows where it came from, where it spread to, and that's a healing area at the top, and the drugs that are helping those that suffer from it. So it had every darn thing in it, and it's a beautiful, the thing that's so wonderful, wonderful now, the windows look absolutely marvellous, and they now are part of this huge, they've cleared the space, and there are literally hundreds of young people there, with their laptops and things working, and there's this quiet hum of hard learning going on in this, and his windows really do give radiance and beauty to this space. So it was well worth the effort. Now, here's Meisterman, the wonderful Meisterman, and he was there. So Tim brought over Poensken, Meisterman, Beschulter, Schreiter, and Schaffrath. They're all really great artists at the time. And it did have a miraculous effect on that cadre of students in Wales. And here's Mark Angus, and I love this new church. I think that he's done, there it is. I mean, it's a very edgy area, to put it mildly, in North London, and he successfully managed to have, a space that's got the feeling of that could be a church and that is still, can be something else, can happen without embarrassing anyone. And he's got these lovely fun things going on that I showed you in the first shot of this black and white stuff. So very, very lively and successful. And this is Graham Jones's work, the most sensitive, probably, aesthetically, of all the students there. This extraordinary kind of way with colour and line, doing the most beautiful. Now, this is the new German glass, who've curiously come to England, to some of the English artists to actually make this stuff. This work is done, it's made by German studios, but it is designed by Graham, who's a good printmaker and a good painter. So he keeps this refreshment of the fine art really going strong. And best of all, really Brian. Now, Brian wasn't at Swansea, but he went on a Winston Churchill travelling scholarship and was completely bowled over by Schreiter's work. I mean, he saw the others, but Schreiter's work just absolutely did it for him. And he spent, I mean, I think you can still, well, if you knew more of Schreiter's work, you'd realise there was still remnants of what he's doing here. The thing I love about Brian is he's a painter and a painter and a painter and a painter. And then the work can go onto glass, and the work can go onto the, and he's an exhibitor, his huge charm, and he's really done masses of work. I mean, go to the website, it's absolutely incredible. And he came from that time. Now this is no more. The trouble is with the commercial works, they go. I mean, this was in Stansted, beautiful background, and it's gone. And he's, it's the ones that are in my book that are the street products, they've gone too. A new firm comes in and says, oh, well, don't like that, something different. So whoosh, out it goes. And this is, it really brings it home to you how important it is that the churches, we hang on to this glass, really, because it is this very precious architectural art which really you've got to keep an eye on. And he's done, you can pass it, it's so beautiful. At Apex, a German street, just go by, it's the entrance hall. So he's got this lovely big painting, sort of walk in the blue, it was very soothing. And these absolutely exquisite acid-etched glasses. Oh, you know, it really, I mean, sheer beauty. You're there in the bluebell wood. It's really, really lovely. Another one, Alex Belashenko. Alex I admire what he does so much. I mean, he's always had a very, very refined taste, but he's working in glass with everything away. This piece, this business of, you know, shattering the glass, he had a wonderful time. He had a friend who was a glass blower, and he said, can you blow the biggest bubble you possibly can, get it off the pipe, and then beat it about and jump up and down on it, and bring me the bits. And his friend said, I've always wanted to do that. So that's the, I don't know whether you can make out the rather sad-looking lady with the boots bag walking past. So what these are is they're the crumbled bits of glass set onto the plate and fired. And it shows here the students who trained at Swansea, or I think just literally just almost come from school and come to Alex's studio workshop and help him with it and thus learn. I mean, Swansea, like all the art colleges, my beloved Central and the Royal College and all the rest of them, have got sort of, I don't know what the word is, it's like some sort of ghastly attack of something, money-making or something, which has meant that kind of glass, our kind of stained glass and hot glass stuff isn't really being done anymore. Except in the north, yes, Sunderland, they're still true to the faith. But here they are helping, and this is incredible, very beautiful work. And he's done some work in Canary Wharf. So we really, he's done the odd church, but really his talent is for clothing architecture in this very, very beautiful way. Now, it's slightly changing direction here because I still feel that you know, the roots of where you were trained and what's around you and who's around you to teach you is terribly important. This is Douglas Hogg, who's brought on a lot of people in Edinburgh. And the Scottish colourists really are Scottish colourists. I mean, there's no getting away from it. And he's got that zip and verve and vitality to his work, which is, you know, he's making these glorious sort of expressionistic things. Of course, it's absolutely typical. Queen's on a horse. The Queen apparently chose this design, strongly suspected because the horse was included. But what really excites, apparently, the general punter to the Queen's Chapel of the Savoy is the fact that the Queen's got a corgi galloping along under the horse's feet. And this has been featured in various dog books. And there are quite a lot of people that come to see the corgi. So it's quite it's sort of bonkers, but really quite sweet that, you know, our craft, such as it is, in all its loftiness, can also appeal at this other level. Now, another ex-Edinburgh is an artist who I'm very much admire, Lever Bredford, who's a fantastic, fabulous painter in what you might call the great sort of Scandinavian tradition. I mean, it's bold, it's about colour, because, hey, we have so much grey. It's strong, it's got its runes and its epics and its gnomes and ghosts and things, so it knows who it is, and it gets on and does it with power and verve. And it's all part of this sort of northern male strength with colour stuff. I don't know, maybe the Spanish do this too. And he did the most beautiful window in Southwark Cathedral. It really is so yummy. My only quarrel with it is that, being an egoist, as well as a very good artist, he's been quite careful to tune this very, very, very strong, bright work with something kind of right over there, which is part of the ambulatory, which absolutely knocks out the Lawrence Lees on either side. Lawrence Lees windows were tactfully accompanying you as you walk down the side aisle, you know, going west rather than from the east. And this one goes doing, you know. But, hey, you know, other than that, it is absolutely fabulous. Now, the other absolutely fabulous window was commissioned by Prince Charles. And I was very lucky because I happened to be working in Goddard and Gibbs on something or other, and while this was being made. And it's absolutely, it is a charming work. And I thought that I would quite like to read out to you what John Napper, himself completely unknown to me, artist, but apparently taught Prince Charles, and this is very, very interesting work. Here's what he has to say. I want to make a synthesis of past and present. If you look at a Giorgione, a Bellini, a Botticelli, they did the same thing. They took their contemporaries and placed them in historical, biblical, or allegorical settings. I like to take a modern look at time-honoured subjects. And he has created a very, very beautiful window. And it is possible to go there. You have to look it up, but there's something like, second Sunday in the month between October and Easter, something like that. But you can go in, you can sit there, you can be part of the service, and you can see it all. And it really, really, really is beautiful. So go there. Now, dynasties and who's doing what. I love this work. I like Joe Nutchins. I think he's like me. He's the child of a well-known and important stained glass family. It's both a curse and a blessing, as John Renshans knows. And in fact, Joe's father, Eddie, was involved in absolutely everybody. Very skillful artist. But so I went and looked at this work in King's College London, and it's absolutely brilliant. You've got to go and see it. It's absolutely wonderful. I mean, he's got these, the two Marys, and it's very thoughtful, and kind of its clumsiness is really quite sort of sacred in its feeling. I was most impressed, and told him, I was most impressed, and it's going to go in the book. And he said, it's awful. And made him come back, made him come and give a lecture to students about it all. Because I had actually a couple of Jewish students who were doing kind of not dissimilar sort of things. It's sort of approach, I should put it, because it tends to be an unfigurative views theirs. And he said it was nice actually to see the work, and he felt kind of, rather better about it, the way one sometimes does. But they are enchanting, and their kind of take on these girls and these boys. So they're all young, It's been wonderful. It's a wonderful sequence, and the people there at King's College are always very pleased to see you, unless there's choir practice or a service or something. You sit at the back, but it's really accessible. Now, another Edinburgh-trained one, Thomas Denny, whom I think most of you know of. I didn't know anything about him until I saw the book with the wonderful photographs, and had a good look at what he'd done, and realised that from where we were in Malvern, where I have my studio, we could actually nip across to Cheltenham and see his first work. And I vaguely remembered my father having, because it goes back a while, talking about this work. And I was absolutely enchanted. It's quite a small room. And these are the parables. And there's, you look at it, and there's this beautiful landscape, painter's landscape, Matthew 18. And you find there's a figure. He's sort of in there, in the landscape somewhere. And then you have to kind of hunt around for the sheep. It's exactly what you do hunt around for the sheep. I mean, so often, the Good Shepherd is shown having, successfully, rather like those carvings of, is it Odin holding, there's this very ancient one of the sheep on the shoulder and the head. Jesus has got the sheep. But, Jesus is looking for the sheep at this point, which is really very much more what, tends to happen, to be looked for. And we took ourselves off to the wilds of, it's a very, very, very peculiar place, the Forest of Dean, put it mildly. It has its own rules, its own laws, its own meeting place, and it's a seriously wild land, and there's this Free Miners window, which is sort of stuck up into a bit of light there, in the tower area, and it's absolutely fabulous. And various people came in, have a look, do the cleaning. And I said, what do you think of it? And they said, really? We keep seeing new things. He does this very, very well, I think. Now, this is one of my students, Ruth Kersler-Greisman, and it's very interesting to see, different take on this is the synagogue for the Jewish Free School. And she comes from sculpture, which I think is very interesting, that can happen. And she's doing lovely things. And then another student of mine, Ben Finn, who was a mathematician and a marine biologist, and then became a Greek Orthodox convert, actually, and is doing some very, very, very nice work in what you might call a refreshed, sort of sacred way, which is being rather abjured at present, I think really wrongly. But gosh, you've got to have nerve and you've got to have skill. I mean, he's pulled off this. I mean, it could be so yuck, and it isn't. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's a real feat and achievement. And I thought I'd, show you kind of, he's found all the old ways for himself, which is kind of very refreshing. And the window you absolutely must see, which is in the Gary Weston Library at Southwark Cathedral, beautiful subtle work and beautiful glass painting. The glass paintings, area of glass painting, we haven't touched on much, but it is in its own terms, in the sense, an entire art form of its own, a bit like sort of etching or something. So I just want to end with this, by the way, is the book. This had a Piper's book, Art or Anti-Art, is a very interesting, very powerful work. And I searched in vain for the phrase that somehow I'd picked up on it. I mean, I read it when it came out in 69 or something. That stained glass was the cart horse of the arts. It's not actually written in here, but there are some very, very strong things that he wrote. And I put these up for you to go home with. That's one of my windows. Clergy be bolder. Stained glass must rightly harmonize. Painting as art, artists to practice it, that's right. And John Ruskin, very interesting that, mysterious and subdued. So that's something you can tuck into your back pocket if you don't know it already. Thank you.